This is amazing. How did you get away with? You recorded this secretly. How did you do that?
Well, when I wrote Independent Woman and Survivor, all the big Destiny's Child records a couple years ago, it was when I was a new songwriter, so no one expected anything from me.
The camera fades in. A roaring stadium fills the screen. Lights flashing. Tens of thousands of voices merging into one deafening chant. Beyoncé! Beyoncé! The world knows her as Queen Bee, the indomitable force who bends the culture of music, fashion, and identity to her will. To the public, she is flawless. A woman who never misses a note, never missteps on stage, never falters in the glare of cameras that seek out imperfection like vultures. But the tragedy of Beyoncé Giselle Knowles-Carter begins where perfection ends. She was born on September 4th, 1981 in Houston, Texas, an ordinary girl who would never be allowed to remain ordinary. Even in her childhood, the seeds of myth were being planted. Her father, Matthew, a businessman with a relentless drive, and her mother, Tina, a creative designer, saw in their daughter something rare, something that needed molding, shaping, sculpting. Her voice was more than a gift. It was a destiny. From the first moment she opened her mouth to sing, the room stilled. The little girl had thunder inside her lungs, and her parents knew it. But destiny is not gentle. While most children were allowed to play freely, Beyoncé's childhood became a rehearsal. Her father, who would one day manage her career, was demanding, insisting on perfection in every note, every step, every breath. He believed she had to be more than good. She had to be undeniable. Her mother, too, worked tirelessly, sewing costumes, creating the image of a star long before the world even knew her name. And so a child's life was sacrificed at the altar of greatness. This is the paradox of Beyoncé's tragedy, that the crown she wears was never freely chosen. It was placed on her head before she could decide who she wanted to be. The introduction of any tragedy begins with the hero's rise, and Beyoncé's rise was meteoric. As lead singer of Destiny's Child, her voice cut through the late 1990s like a clarion call. Say My Name, Bills, 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 Survivor. These weren't just hits, they were declarations of power, anthems for a generation of young women. Yet even here, even in the glow of stardom, the shadow of heartbreak followed her. Destiny's Child was marketed as a sisterhood, but behind the scenes it was conflict and fractures. Members left, accusations of favoritism arose, and friendships crumbled under the weight of Matthew Knowles' strict control and Beyoncé's designated role as the frontwoman. For every success she celebrated, there was a cost in loyalty, intimacy, and trust. Fame gave her millions of fans, but it took away her closest companions. The tragedy was not visible to the audience. They saw only unity, beauty, and success. But Beyoncé's story was already becoming clear. To ascend, she would have to walk alone. Her solo career launched like a thunderclap in 2003 with Dangerously in Love. Crazy in Love wasn't just a song, it was an explosion, a cultural earthquake that announced her not just as a former girl group member, but as a singular force in the music world. Grammys lined her shelves, critics bowed to her artistry, and her face appeared on every magazine cover in the world. Yet again, the paradox returned. The more she became Beyoncé, the further she drifted from Beyoncé Giselle Knowles-Carter, the girl from Houston, the daughter, the sister, the shy child who once hid behind her mother's legs. Stardom devoured her humanity, leaving in its place an icon so vast, so unreachable, that people stopped speaking of her as a woman and began to speak of her as a god. And gods, history tells us, always suffer the deepest tragedies. Behind the glamorous photo shoots, behind the Super Bowl halftime show, behind the Vogue covers and the platinum plaques, there were wounds that never closed. She endured miscarriages in silence, the devastation of watching life slip away before it could begin. She endured betrayal at the hands of the man she trusted most, her husband, Jay-Z, whose infidelity would one day become the subject of her rawest, most cutting art. She endured the physical cost of her body nearly breaking during pregnancy when carrying twins nearly took her life. Yet she performed, she smiled, she built her empire. The world saw a goddess. Inside, she often felt like a prisoner of her own myth. The true tragedy of Beyoncé is not failure. She never truly failed. It is the cost of success so absolute that it consumed the possibility of a normal life. She is a mother, a wife, a daughter, a sister, but those roles have always been overshadowed by the role the world demanded of her: Queen. Her fans, her critics, the music industry, even entire cultures look to her as a symbol. For Black women, she is representation on the grandest stage. For feminists, she is a warrior of empowerment. For the music industry, she is prophet incarnate. For the world, she is perfection. But who is she allowed to be for herself? That is where the heartbreak lives, in the spaces between the applause, in the silence after the stage lights dim. This story you're about to hear, the life of Beyoncé, will not be told as a fairy tale. It will not celebrate only her victories. Instead, it will examine the cost of being Beyoncé, the sacrifices hidden behind the smiles, the losses behind the songs, the loneliness behind the glamour. It is the story of a woman who gave everything to the world and received worship in return, but also ridicule, betrayal, and exhaustion. It is the story of how a young girl from Houston became a global icon, and how that icon sometimes left the woman beneath it, gasping for air.
Early life and childhood. A star is forged in fire. Every tragedy begins long before the audience arrives. For Beyoncé Giselle Knowles, her tragedy began not in the stadiums she would one day command, but in the modest neighborhoods of Houston, Texas, where the foundations of greatness were laid with equal parts love and relentless pressure. She was born on September 4th, 1981, into a household that seemed ordinary on the surface. Her father, Matthew Knowles, was a hard-working Xerox salesman, sharp-minded and ambitious. Her mother, Tina, was a gifted hairdresser and designer with a creative soul. They were a middle-class Black family in America, a world of both possibility and limitation. But in Beyoncé, they recognized something that set her apart. By the age of 7, she was already winning local talent shows, her voice so powerful that it stunned audiences into silence. A teacher once discovered her talent by accident. Beyoncé, the shy little girl who barely raised her hand in class, suddenly belted out a note that carried across the room like lightning. From that moment, it was no longer a question of if she would be great, but how far her greatness would reach. Yet this gift was not nurtured gently. It was sculpted with fire. The father's dream. Matthew Knowles was not content with allowing his daughter's gift to blossom naturally. He saw the cruel truth of the music industry. Talent alone was never enough. To succeed, Beyoncé would have to be sharper, tougher and more disciplined than anyone else. So he took control. He quit his corporate job, a decision that nearly destroyed the family's financial stability, to manage his daughter full-time. He organized rehearsals that ran for hours, drilled her until her legs ached, and demanded that every note, every gesture, every breath be perfect. There were no excuses, no allowances for childhood whims. Failure was not an option. And while Beyoncé would one day thank her father for instilling this unbreakable discipline, the cost was immediate. Her childhood vanished. The playground was replaced by rehearsal rooms. Friendships were replaced by auditions. Innocence was replaced by the constant need to be flawless. Where other children were allowed to stumble, Beyoncé had to shine. This was the beginning of her paradox. The child who seemed born to conquer the world was never truly allowed to simply be a child. The mother's sacrifice. While Matthew drove Beyoncé toward perfection, Tina provided the armor that would shield her. She created the costumes, stitched with love, but also with ambition, transforming her daughter from a Houston girl into a star in the making. Tina knew the world would not be kind to a young black girl chasing superstardom. She knew that doors would not open easily, that Beyoncé would have to force them open, and image was as much a weapon as voice. And so she built the look, the confidence, the visual splendor that made Beyoncé unforgettable even in her earliest performances. But Tina's sacrifice mirrored Matthew's in another way. Her daughter's humanity became a project, a canvas upon which destiny was painted. And while the world would later celebrate the glitz, the gowns, the style, the little girl inside was disappearing under the fabric. Girls' Time, the first taste of heartbreak. By the late 1980s, Matthew had organized Beyoncé into a girl group. She was only 9 years old. Alongside Kelly Rowland and other local talents, Beyoncé began performing at showcases, beauty pageants, and talent competitions. The rehearsals were grueling, the expectations impossible, yet Beyoncé thrived, or seemed to. Her voice soared above the others, her stage presence undeniable even at such a tender age. But the harshness of the industry arrived early. In 1993, Girls' Time competed on Star Search, the biggest talent show in America. They lost. The defeat was devastating. Cameras captured their smiles, but backstage, Beyoncé wept. Years later, she would describe this moment as one of her first lessons in heartbreak, that even when you give everything, the world can still turn away. For most children, such a moment might have been a lesson in resilience, an opportunity to try again another day. For Beyoncé, it was a commandment. You will never lose again. That vow, born from the tears of a 9-year-old girl, would shape her entire life. And it is here that her tragedy deepens, because the vow to never fail is not freedom, it is a chain. The price of perfection. The Knowles household became less of a home and more a training ground. Matthew's rules were strict, almost militant. If the girls, Beyoncé, Kelly, and the other members, missed a step, they repeated the routine until their bodies begged for rest. If their harmonies faltered, they sang again and again until every note blended seamlessly. Failure was punished not with anger, but with disappointment. And for Beyoncé, disappointing her father was unbearable. So she pushed herself beyond exhaustion, beyond childhood limits, beyond what any young girl should be asked to give. This constant striving created the woman the world would one day call flawless. But it also carved deep cracks beneath the surface, cracks of anxiety, of fear, of loneliness. Beyoncé grew up believing that love was conditional, tied to performance. She learned early that she was valued most when she was extraordinary, and rarely for simply being herself. Loneliness in a crowd. People often imagine child stars surrounded by fans, by friends, by an adoring public. But Beyoncé's reality was far lonelier. While other girls went to birthday parties, Beyoncé rehearsed. While classmates dated, experimented, laughed, and stumbled, Beyoncé worked. While others made mistakes in private, Beyoncé was trained to ensure she never made them at all. And so while she seemed to be living a dream, in truth, she was already living in a cage, a golden cage, lined with ambition and expectation. Every applause she received confirmed the worth of the performer, but the girl behind the performer remained unseen. Foreshadowing the tragedy. In Greek tragedy, the hero's fate is always foreshadowed in their youth. Achilles was prophesied to destroy his family before he could even speak. For Beyoncé, the foreshadowing was clear. The obsession with perfection, the erasure of her childhood, the vow to never fail, the loneliness that crept in even in victory. These threads wove themselves into the tapestry of her life, preparing her for the glory she would achieve, but also for the heartbreaks that glory would demand. The end of childhood, the beginning of myth. By the time she was a teenager, Beyoncé was no longer seen as a girl. She was a project, a product, a rising star. Columbia Records signed Destiny's Child in the late 1990s, and the trajectory of her life was sealed. The innocence of Houston was left behind. The little girl who once hid behind her mother's legs was gone. In her place stood a performer trained for war, a young woman who carried not only her own dreams, but the ambitions of her family, her community, and soon the world. But every crown has a weight, and for Beyoncé, that weight began crushing her long before she was strong enough to carry it. This was Beyoncé's childhood, not a playground, but a battlefield. Not a time of innocence, but a time of forging. A star was born, yes, but the little girl was lost. And that loss would haunt every triumph that came after.
Destiny's Child, Fame and Betrayal. When the curtain rose on the late 1990s, the music world was shifting. The age of the girl group was in full swing. TLC, SVW, En Vogue, voices that redefined R&B for a new generation. Into this arena, 4 young girls from Houston stepped with wide eyes, braided hair, and rehearsed harmonies. They called themselves Destiny's Child, and at their center stood Beyoncé Giselle Knowles, the voice that would soon echo across the globe. But the tragedy of Beyoncé cannot be told without the story of Destiny's Child. For it was in this group that she tasted both the intoxicating sweetness of early fame and the bitter sting of betrayal, a pattern that would follow her long after the group disbanded. The birth of Destiny. After the heartbreak of Star Search with Girls' Time, Matthew Knowles restructured the group. He trimmed down its lineup, reshaped its sound, and tightened its image. His daughter, Beyoncé, remained the anchor, joined by Kelly Rowland, Latavia Roberson, and LaToya Luckett. They renamed themselves Destiny's Child, a title heavy with symbolism. For Matthew and Tina, Beyoncé's path was no longer a dream, it was destiny. And the girls, barely teenagers, were tasked with carrying this prophecy into reality. The group performed tirelessly around Houston, appearing at every showcase, talent show, and local festival. But their big break came when Columbia Records signed them in the late 1990s. What began as a father's vision suddenly became a corporate machine. In 1998, their debut album, self-titled, was released, led by the single No No No. The song climbed the charts, signaling the arrival of a new voice in R&B. The group wasn't yet iconic, but the seed had been planted. The rise to stardom. The turning point came with their sophomore album, The Writings on the Wall, 1999. Singles like Bills, Bills, Bills and Say My Name exploded across radio waves. The world was introduced not just to a girl group, but to a movement. Their voices carried sass, independence, and defiance. Songs about unfaithful lovers, financial independence, and the power of self-worth. Girls across the world found anthems in Destiny's Child. They weren't just singers, they were spokeswomen for a generation. And at the heart of it all was Beyoncé, the commanding voice that drove every chorus into the cultural bloodstream. But here is where the tragedy sharpened its teeth. The shadow of favoritism. Behind the glossy music videos and chart-topping hits, fractures were forming. Beyoncé was undeniably the star, and everyone could see it. Matthew Knowles, acting as manager, placed her in the center of the spotlight, her voice dominating, her face always at the front. Latavia and LaToya, feeling sidelined, accused Matthew of favoritism. They resented Beyoncé's position, resented the imbalance that left her with the lion's share of attention. Whispers began to spread that Destiny's Child wasn't a group, it was Beyoncé, with background singers orbiting around her. What should have been a sisterhood became a competition. Resentment brewed, arguments flared, and trust cracked. Then came the ultimate betrayal. The infamous lineup change. In 2000, just as Say My Name was climbing to the top of the charts, Latavia and LaToya were abruptly removed from the group. Their replacements, Michelle Williams and Farrah Franklin, appeared suddenly in the music video, shocking fans and igniting controversy. Latavia and LaToya claimed they were dismissed without warning, learning of their firing only after watching the Say My Name video. They accused Matthew of manipulating the group, accused Beyoncé of compliance, accused Destiny's Child of being a dictatorship rather than a democracy. Lawsuits followed, friendships shattered. For Beyoncé, this was a public humiliation disguised as victory. The group was at the height of its success, yet she was portrayed as a villain, the girl who sacrificed her friends for fame, the puppet of her father's ruthless ambition. The betrayal cut deep on all sides. Latavia and LaToya felt betrayed by the dream they had built together. Beyoncé felt betrayed by the narrative that she was cold, power-hungry, heartless. The public, eager for drama, feasted on the scandal. And thus, even in triumph, Beyoncé tasted the bitterness of isolation. Survivors of the storm. Farrah Franklin soon left, leaving Beyoncé, Kelly, and Michelle as the core three. Against the odds, they rebuilt their reputation and emerged stronger. Their album Survivor 2001 was both a response to the controversy and a declaration of resilience. The title track, Survivor, became an anthem for overcoming betrayal and hardship. On the surface, it was triumphant, but beneath it lay a haunting irony. Beyoncé was singing about survival not only in love, but in friendship, in loyalty, in her own battle to prove she was more than her father's chosen favorite. Destiny's Child had been reborn, but Beyoncé's innocence was not. The double-edged sword of fame. As the trio soared to superstardom, releasing hits like Bootylicious, Independent Women, and Lose My Breath, the world hailed them as icons of female empowerment. Yet for Beyoncé, empowerment came with shackles. The world adored her voice, but scrutinized her every move. Tabloids painted her as aloof, too perfect, unrelatable. Critics claimed she was overmanaged, her artistry micromanaged by Matthew Knowles. Even her own success was weaponized against her. Every time she shone too brightly, the whispers of favoritism returned. What was meant to be a sisterhood had become a burden of proof. Beyoncé had to prove she deserved the spotlight, prove she wasn't just her father's project, prove she wasn't betraying those around her to climb higher. The applause was deafening, but so was the suspicion. The cost of betrayal. By the early 2000s, Destiny's Child had become one of the best-selling girl groups of all time. Yet the scars of betrayal never healed. Beyoncé lost childhood friends, faced public backlash, and carried the guilt of being at the center of a storm she didn't fully control. The tragedy here lies in what fame demanded of her. In order to rise, she had to lose. In order to be celebrated, she had to be resented. In order to stand at the front of the stage, she had to watch others walk away. For Beyoncé, Destiny's Child was both a dream come true and a nightmare realized. It gave her fame, but it also gave her enemies. It gave her power, but it also made her a target. It gave her sisterhood, but it also tore it apart. The inevitable end. By 2005, Destiny's Child officially disbanded after their Destiny Fulfilled tour. The three women embraced on stage, presenting a united front. Fans cried, critics wrote elegies, and the industry mourned the end of an era. But for Beyoncé, this ending was also a beginning. Destiny's Child had given her the platform, the voice, the fame, but it had also given her betrayal, isolation, and the reputation of being untouchable, both adored and resented. As she stepped into her solo career, she carried not only the lessons of success, but the scars of lost friendship. The tragic pattern. Looking back, the story of Destiny's Child foreshadowed the rest of Beyoncé's life. Success and betrayal would always walk hand in hand. Every triumph would carry suspicion, every victory whispers of manipulation. Love and loyalty would often crumble under the weight of ambition. The little girl from Houston had dreamed of singing with her friends. Instead, she emerged from the experience crowned as a star, but at the price of trust, at the price of companionship, at the price of innocence.
The solo star is born, dangerously in love. When Destiny's Child disbanded in 2005, fans wept at the end of an era. But in truth, the seeds of Beyoncé's solo destiny had been sown years earlier. While the world saw three women walking off the stage together, Beyoncé was already being prepared to walk onto another, one larger, lonelier, and infinitely more demanding. Her tragedy deepens here. She would gain everything: critical acclaim, cultural dominance, wealth beyond imagination. But in gaining it, she would step further into isolation. The solo star is a figure both adored and alone, and Beyoncé was about to become the brightest, loneliest star in the sky. The weight of expectation. By 2003, before Destiny's Child's official end, Beyoncé had already begun her solo journey. But this wasn't just a career move, it was a test. The whispers had been relentless. She only shines because of Destiny's Child. Her father is the puppet master. Without him, she is nothing. She can't stand alone. She hides behind the group. These doubts stalked her, taunting her, threatening to erase everything she had built. The pressure was unbearable. If her solo album failed, her entire career might collapse. If it succeeded, it would confirm both her greatness and the accusations of her critics that Destiny's Child had always been her stage. It was a no-win situation, and yet she stepped forward anyway. Dangerously in Love, the proving ground. In 2003, Beyoncé released her debut solo album, Dangerously in Love. The title itself was a foreshadowing: love, danger, success, and heartbreak intertwined. The album was a triumph. Singles like Crazy in Love and Baby Boy exploded across charts worldwide. Crazy in Love became more than a hit. It became an anthem of the decade. Its opening horns instantly recognizable. Its music video transforming Beyoncé into an untouchable icon. She won 5 Grammy Awards for the album, cementing her place as not just a former girl group member, but as the solo artist of her generation. The world now saw Beyoncé as a phenomenon, but what the world didn't see was the toll. The weight of perfection. Beyoncé's success wasn't accidental. It was the result of excruciating work. She rehearsed obsessively, performing routines until her body ached, recording takes until her voice was raw. Every detail was controlled, every angle considered. To the public, she appeared flawless, but perfection is a prison. The more flawless she appeared, the more she was expected to remain flawless forever. One wrong step, one false note, one failed single, and the world would devour her. And so, Beyoncé didn't just become a star, she became a standard. Not a woman, but an ideal. Not a person, but a symbol. And symbols cannot afford to break. The Lonely Crown. With the success of Dangerously in Love, Beyoncé achieved what few ever do: superstardom. But superstardom is a lonely throne. She was no longer surrounded by bandmates who shared the weight of fame. The applause was hers alone, but so was the pressure, so was the criticism, so was the fear. The friendships of Destiny's Child were gone, replaced by managers, bodyguards, assistants. The young woman who had once shared a microphone with her friends now stood alone at the front of stadiums, singing to tens of thousands, yet connecting with no one. This was the paradox of Beyoncé's solo success. The bigger the audience, the lonelier the performer. Love in the spotlight. During this time, Beyoncé's relationship with Jay-Z began to move into public view. Their collaboration on Crazy in Love wasn't just musical, it was personal. The world saw them as the ultimate power couple, music royalty, untouchable in their wealth, talent, and influence. But even here, tragedy whispered.
Was their love real or a calculated partnership? Could Beyoncé ever be seen as more than Jay-Z's protégé? Would her heart belong to her or to the narrative others wrote for her? Even in love, Beyoncé found herself performing, smiling for cameras, dodging rumors, carefully curating an image of perfection. But behind the glittering facade, insecurity lingered. Love, like fame, became another stage. The father's shadow. As her solo career took flight, so too did the whispers about her father's control. Matthew Knowles managed every detail: contracts, tours, appearances. Critics accused him of exploiting her daughter, of tightening the leash rather than loosening it. For Beyoncé, this was another impossible paradox. The man who had given her discipline, who had sacrificed everything to build her career, was also the man who kept her chained to an image she hadn't chosen. He was both savior and jailer, protector and oppressor. And though she would one day break away from his management, the shadow of his influence would haunt her for years, shaping her fear of trust, her obsession with control, her perfectionism that bordered on self-destruction. The tragic irony of triumph. By 2005, Beyoncé was everywhere. Her face adorned magazines, her music ruled radio, her image became global currency. She was hailed as the new queen of pop, the successor to legends like Whitney Houston and Janet Jackson. And yet, here lies the heartbreaking irony. The more the world adored her, the more she questioned if she was loved as herself or as a product. The more her image was celebrated, the more she felt invisible beneath it. The higher she climbed, the more she feared falling. Her life in many ways became the embodiment of her debut album's title, Dangerously in Love, not only with Jay-Z, but with music, with perfection, with the very thing that was both her salvation and her prison. Foreshadowing the future. The story of Dangerously in Love was not just the story of a debut album. It was the foreshadowing of the rest of Beyoncé's career. A life of triumph shadowed by isolation. A crown of glory that weighed like chains. A public image so perfect it left no room for humanity. Her solo stardom was both a blessing and a curse. It proved she could stand alone, but it also ensured she would always stand alone. The tragic arc. In Greek tragedy, the hero's fatal flaw is often hidden within their strength. For Beyoncé, her flaw was perfection itself. Her ability to dominate, to shine brighter than anyone else, made her immortal in the eyes of fans, but it also stripped her of vulnerability, of relatability, of the freedom to simply exist without performing. Dangerously in Love crowned her a queen, but it also locked her in a cage. This was Beyoncé's solo birth, the triumphant rise of a star, shadowed by the tragic loneliness of perfection. The world cheered as she ascended, but few saw the cost. For every applause that echoed, there was a silence afterwards, a silence that only she could hear.
Fame, Control, and the Machine. B-Day and I Am Sasha Fierce. Beyoncé's rise as a solo artist was no longer tentative. It was a full-blown assault on the world's senses. Yet the brilliance of her ascent was intertwined with a quiet, often invisible tragedy, the relentless machinery of fame that demanded more than just her talent. She had stepped out of Destiny's Child, proven herself on the global stage, but the world now required her not only to perform, but to exist as a symbol, a brand, a standard, often at the expense of her own humanity. The pressure of success.
By 2006, after Dangerously in Love, Beyoncé faced the unspoken yet undeniable reality of the music industry. Her debut had set a bar so high that anything less would be a failure. The record executives, critics, and fans alike watched her every move, their expectations both limitless and merciless. She entered the studio for her second album, B-Day, under a pressure most cannot comprehend. Days turned into nights, nights bled into mornings, and still she worked, rehearsing choreography until her muscles ached, recording vocals until her voice cracked. Every note had to be perfect. Every beat had to resonate with power. This was no longer about music alone. It was about control. Every lyric, every move, every visual image needed to reinforce the Beyoncé brand. And in that need for control lay tragedy. She was forced to negotiate the boundary between artistry and persona, between self and spectacle. The physical and emotional toll. During the production of B-Day, Beyoncé pushed herself to the brink. Dance rehearsals extended for 12-hour stretches, often leaving her body battered and exhausted. Vocal sessions demanded precision. Any flaw was unacceptable. The album's release coincided with the 2006 FIFA World Cup, and Beyoncé's performance of the song Irreplaceable became iconic. But even amid these triumphs, she often felt an emptiness that only she could understand. The tragic irony, she was adored yet increasingly isolated. Her fame had become a cage. Her talent, which once seemed to liberate her, now bound her to impossible expectations. She had everything the world wanted: money, recognition, influence, but what she craved most, freedom to exist without scrutiny, remained elusive. I Am Sasha Fierce, Duality, and The Mask. In 2008, Beyoncé released an album that would crystallize her duality and the tragedy of her stardom. The first disc, I Am, revealed Beyoncé's vulnerable, introspective side, a woman reflecting on love, heartbreak, and the cost of ambition. The second disc, Sasha Fierce, introduced an alter ego, fierce, untouchable, untamed. This alter ego was both liberating and confining. Sasha Fierce allowed her to perform without hesitation, to inhabit a persona capable of commanding stages, arenas, and audiences with an intensity that few could match. Yet it also symbolized the tragic necessity of separation. To be herself in private, she had to become someone else in public. This duality defined much of Beyoncé's career. On stage, she could conquer the world. Off stage, she could only whisper the fragments of her true self. Sasha Fierce was her armor, but also a reminder that authenticity came at a cost. Her personal life, her emotional availability, her right to vulnerability, all became secondary to the machine of her public image. The cost of the spotlight. During this period, the tragedy of Beyoncé's fame became more visible. The world scrutinized everything: her body, her relationships, her clothing, her every word. Paparazzi shadowed her. Photographers invaded her privacy, and tabloid rumors spread like wildfire. Even in her most intimate moments, her engagement to Jay-Z, the birth of her first child, the glare of the public eye never fully dimmed. Each personal milestone became public spectacle, a reminder that in her life, love and privacy could never exist unobserved. She faced relentless commentary. Was her marriage authentic or another performance? Could she balance motherhood with career without losing herself? Would her ambition overshadow her humanity? The burden of scrutiny, coupled with the weight of expectation, created an almost unbearable tension. Every move, every note, every smile had to satisfy the world, leaving little room for error, little room for rest. Artistry as resistance. Amid this suffocating pressure, Beyoncé's response was to double down on artistry. She became a master of control, controlling performances, visuals, music videos, even the narratives surrounding her life. Music became not just a career, but a means of survival, a tool to assert agency in a world determined to define her. The creation of I Am Sasha Fierce itself was a statement of resistance. It was Beyoncé asserting, I am many things. I am fragile. I am fierce. I am human. Yet this statement also carried tragedy. To express her humanity, she needed a mask. To show vulnerability, she needed to distance herself. Isolation behind the spotlight. The fame she had earned separated her from ordinary experiences. Everyday interactions became complicated by her celebrity. Friends became cautious, wary of proximity. Strangers became intrusive, demanding access. Even within her family, her decisions were scrutinized and debated. Beyoncé's isolation was invisible to most, yet profound. She stood at the pinnacle of the music industry, adored by millions, yet the very adoration she inspired became a barrier to normalcy. Ordinary joys, quiet moments, casual conversations, spontaneous outings were now fraught with impossibility. Even the simple act of falling in love, of building intimacy, became a strategic decision. Her relationship with Jay-Z was carefully navigated, balancing authenticity with protection, passion with discretion. Love, in the age of Beyoncé, became a performance as well, a tragic necessity dictated by the machinery of fame. Tragedy within triumph. The irony of Beyoncé's career during the B-Day and I Am Sasha Fierce era is stark. The more she achieved, the more isolated she became. The higher she rose, the lonelier she stood. Her fame, while celebrated, was a double-edged sword. It empowered her, yet also demanded perfection, exacting a psychological toll invisible to the public. She had mastered the art of control, but control required constant vigilance. Every imperfection could be weaponized by critics. Every lapse in judgment could be magnified into scandal. She became, in essence, both artist and prisoner, the world's obsession a gilded cage from which she could not fully escape. Foreshadowing later battles. This period foreshadowed future struggles. The intense preparation for world tours, the painstaking creation of visual albums, the unrelenting self-discipline. Every decision was informed by the understanding that the public eye never blinks, never rests. Her artistry became a coping mechanism for survival. Yet even as she created, she was constantly aware of the cost. Her humanity, her privacy, her ability to simply be. B-Day and I Am Sasha Fierce were not merely albums, they were monuments to ambition, resilience, and the tragic weight of fame. They marked Beyoncé's emergence as a solo force, yet also revealed the paradox of her existence, a woman at the height of global power, yet trapped by the very success she had achieved. Conclusion: the human cost. In hindsight, the period of 2006 to 2009 was not just about Beyoncé asserting herself as a solo artist. It was a masterclass in survival under impossible conditions. It was the story of a woman who had to fight for every note, every image, every public perception. Her tragedy was subtle but profound. In gaining unparalleled power, she had surrendered ordinary freedom. In becoming immortalized on stages worldwide, she
Marriage, motherhood, and the private heartbreak. Beyoncé behind the veil. By the late 2000s, Beyoncé had cemented her place as one of the most powerful solo artists in the world. But while the glittering lights of fame shone on stage and screen, her personal life began a journey of profound, often hidden trials. Marriage and motherhood, the experiences that most might consider the pinnacle of fulfillment, became, for Beyoncé, arenas of private heartbreak, negotiation, and sometimes fear. The union with Sean Jay-Z. Beyoncé's relationship with Sean Jay-Z Carter began as a convergence of two monumental careers. By the early 2000s, Jay-Z was an icon in his own right. Rapper, mogul, cultural figure. Their union promised synergy, yet the intersection of two lives under intense scrutiny created an environment few could navigate. The couple's courtship was meticulously private, but even whispers of their relationship became fodder for tabloids. Every public appearance, award shows, premieres, music videos, was dissected. Fans speculated, journalists hypothesized, and the press constructed a narrative that alternated between fairy tale romance and cautionary tale. Even when they married in a private ceremony in 2008, the act itself was laden with tension. To the world, it was a triumph. Beyoncé, the golden girl of pop and R&B, joined with Jay-Z, the rap mogul. Yet behind closed doors, marriage for Beyoncé meant reconciling love with career, intimacy with expectation, personal desire with public demand. Pregnancy and motherhood. Motherhood arrived in 2012 with the birth of Blue Ivy Carter. For Beyoncé, the experience of pregnancy was deeply personal, yet public. Every movement, every update, every image became a spectacle. Fans and media debated her body, her choices, and even her perceived parenting style. Pregnancy, while joyous, brought new layers of pressure. Beyoncé was not only a mother, but a symbol, an icon of health, beauty, and perfection. Yet the physical and emotional realities were complex. The exhaustion of pregnancy, the anxiety of childbirth, the fear of public judgment on every private moment. For a woman whose entire career had been built on control and perfection, surrendering to the unpredictability of pregnancy was both liberating and terrifying. Even postpartum, Beyoncé faced an invisible battle. Her body, once an instrument of artistic mastery, now bore the marks of life itself. Each stage of recovery was public, analyzed, and critiqued. Every return to stage performance was scrutinized for evidence of physical or emotional weakness. The demands of her dual identity, as an artist and as a mother, created a private tragedy few could see. She had to exist as a superhuman while processing deeply human experiences. Balancing marriage and career. Marriage with Jay-Z was not immune to strain. Both were global superstars, with careers that demanded travel, long hours, and relentless focus. Conflicts arose, amplified by media speculation and the public's insatiable appetite for scandal. The personal and professional were inextricably linked, yet the world often interpreted every disagreement, every silence, as evidence of a larger collapse. Beyoncé's tragedy in this arena was subtle but significant. Her love life, private and sacred, was constantly refracted through the lens of fame. Moments that should have been intimate, private dinners, quiet walks, simple gestures of affection, were instead analyzed, commodified, and displayed for global consumption. Love existed, but always under siege, never fully free. Jay-Z's infidelity, and the heartbreak. Perhaps the most profound heartbreak of Beyoncé's adult life emerged in the early 2010s, when rumors and confirmation of Jay-Z's infidelity surfaced. The betrayal struck at the core of her existence. Trust shattered, the sanctity of marriage violated, and her carefully maintained image of perfection threatened. In interviews and through her art, Beyoncé revealed the pain she endured. Her album Lemonade 2016 became a public catharsis, exploring betrayal, anger, reconciliation, and self-empowerment. Yet behind the artistry lay a human story of heartbreak that few could imagine. The anguish of a woman who had invested deeply in love, only to have it fractured by deception. The creative process of Lemonade itself was both therapy and tragedy. Songwriting, visual storytelling, and performance allowed Beyoncé to confront her pain. Yet the act of exposing her heartbreak to millions carried its own emotional toll. Each lyric, each video, each live performance was a negotiation: how much to reveal, how much to preserve, and how to transform suffering into art. Motherhood as solace and challenge. Amid heartbreak, motherhood remained both a refuge and a responsibility. Raising Blue Ivy and later twins Rumi and Sir in 2017 was an act of devotion requiring balance, patience, and unyielding focus. Beyoncé's tragedy was that even the most intimate, nurturing moments could not escape public scrutiny. Every outing, every photograph, every glimpse of family life became public property. She had to navigate this reality while protecting her children from the very machinery that had defined her own life. The struggle was real, to give her children a sense of normalcy, yet remain fully present in the world of entertainment and cultural influence. The physical demands were immense. Pregnancies, childbirth, recovery, and constant performance schedules tested her body and psyche. Emotional demands were equally relentless. She had to reconcile joy, fear, and grief in private, often in isolation, while presenting a composed, radiant public image. The psychological weight. Beyoncé's personal life during this era highlights a rarely acknowledged aspect of fame: psychological strain. The need to maintain control, perfection, and composure, coupled with betrayal and the responsibilities of motherhood, created an ongoing internal tension. She was a superstar, adored by millions, yet every personal victory or milestone carried the risk of public misinterpretation. Her tragedy here is subtle, almost invisible: the isolation born of fame. Beyoncé could not fully confide in anyone outside a tightly curated circle. Trust was fragile. Privacy was a rare commodity. Emotional support, when sought, had to navigate layers of security, public interest, and media speculation. Her art became a vehicle for expressing what could not be spoken privately. Yet even the transformative power of music could not entirely erase the solitude and heartbreak that fame, marriage, and motherhood imposed. Love, forgiveness, and redemption. Despite betrayal and public scrutiny, Beyoncé chose a path of both artistic and personal resilience. She worked through betrayal, reconciled with her husband, and transformed heartbreak into empowerment. Lemonade became a universal story of pain, agency, and healing, resonating with millions who had faced similar struggles. Her personal tragedy became a source of creative fuel, yet the underlying pain remained. The scars of betrayal, the challenge of balancing personal life and career, and the constant need to protect her family from the very world that elevated her. Beyoncé's journey demonstrates a paradox. The greatest love she experienced coexisted with profound heartbreak, and the greatest joy, motherhood, was inseparable from relentless responsibility and public gaze. Conclusion: the private tragedy. The story of Beyoncé's marriage and motherhood is a study in contrasts: public adoration versus private struggle, love versus betrayal, joy versus exhaustion. The heartbreak is not sensationalized tabloid fodder. It is the quiet, enduring sorrow of a woman who gave her all to love, family, and career while constantly negotiating the impossible expectations placed upon her. In her story, we see the human cost of being larger than life. Beyoncé, the mother, the wife, the woman behind the legend, navigates heartbreak with grace, resilience, and an unwavering commitment to both family and art. Yet even as she triumphs publicly, the echoes of her private struggles remain, a testament to the emotional complexity of a life lived at the pinnacle of fame.
Infidelity, betrayal, and artistic catharsis, Beyoncé's darkest hour. By the mid-2010s, Beyoncé had reached the apex of global fame. Her albums were cultural events, her tours were sold-out spectacles, and her influence extended far beyond music into fashion, film, and activism. Yet, even in this seemingly untouchable position, she faced a deeply personal crisis: the revelation of infidelity by the one person she had entrusted with her heart, Sean Jay-Z Carter. This period marked a profound turning point in Beyoncé's life. It was a time when love, trust, and security, pillars she had leaned on for nearly a decade, were fractured. Unlike the public trials of fame or the physical hardships of performance and motherhood, this betrayal cut to the core of her identity. It was intimate, private, and yet unavoidably public. The private pain, public exposure. The first whispers of Jay-Z's infidelity appeared in celebrity tabloids as subtle insinuations and rumors, but for Beyoncé, the impact was devastating long before the world knew. Betrayal of this magnitude is never merely about actions. It is about trust shattered, the world one has built alongside a partner suddenly destabilized. Beyoncé's heartbreak was compounded by the inescapable gaze of fame. Every tear, every whispered conversation, every moment of doubt risked becoming public spectacle. While most people might suffer heartbreak in private, Beyoncé's pain was magnified by the certainty that millions were watching, speculating, judging. This dual reality, private suffering under public scrutiny, created a complex emotional burden that few could truly comprehend. She was trapped in a paradox. She needed to process her grief in solitude, yet the very nature of her fame meant that every move, every reaction could be dissected and displayed. The world had access to her pain, but she had to retain control, composure, and dignity amidst the chaos. Art as therapy. It was in this crucible of betrayal that Beyoncé turned to her greatest strength, her artistry. Lemonade, released in 2016, became not just an album, but a cathartic journey through the stages of heartbreak. Every song was a piece of her soul laid bare. Tracks like Sorry and Don't Hurt Yourself expressed anger, disbelief, and raw emotion. The accompanying visual album was cinematic in scope, depicting narratives of betrayal, isolation, and eventual empowerment. The storytelling was not fictionalized for drama. It was an authentic reflection of the emotional landscape Beyoncé navigated. Through the album, she transformed personal tragedy into universal resonance. Millions of fans, particularly women, recognized themselves in her pain, anger, and eventual reclamation of power. Yet for Beyoncé, this process was both liberation and reliving of trauma. Each lyric, each vocal inflection, each frame of the visual album required her to confront the betrayal anew,
to inhabit the emotional reality she was working to process. The emotional landscape of betrayal. Infidelity carries layers of heartbreak that extend beyond the act itself. For Beyoncé, the psychological impact was profound. Trust shattered. Years of intimacy and partnership were suddenly questioned. The emotional scaffolding of her marriage seemed to tremble, leaving her to rebuild both confidence in her partner and in herself. Self-reflection. Questions of self-worth, desirability, and adequacy became unavoidable. Beyoncé had to reconcile the pain of betrayal with her own sense of identity as a woman, an artist, and a mother. Public scrutiny. Every moment of doubt risked becoming media fodder. The betrayal was personal, but the audience's intrusion made it performative in ways she could not control. This emotional turbulence demanded both immense personal resilience and creative channeling. Beyoncé's response was to reclaim narrative authority, turning anguish into art and turning scrutiny into storytelling. Reclaiming power through art. Lemonade was not simply an album, it was a manifesto of emotional survival. Beyoncé's exploration of betrayal included confronting the shame, anger, and grief that infidelity often produces. Musical catharsis. Each song allowed her to express facets of her experience: rage, sorrow, questioning, and eventual empowerment. The musical arrangements themselves, heavy beats, haunting melodies, and powerful vocals, amplified the emotional intensity, letting listeners feel the depth of her pain. Visual storytelling. The visual album transformed her personal heartbreak into a collective, almost mythic narrative. Images of isolation, confrontation, and resilience framed her suffering in ways that were both intimate and cinematic. Every visual choice, from wardrobe to location, conveyed layers of emotional truth. Cultural dialogue. By releasing such a personal work to the public, Beyoncé forced a conversation about fidelity, trust, and agency. She reshaped the narrative from one of victimhood to one of empowerment, demonstrating how heartbreak can catalyze self-reclamation. Through this artistry, she not only processed her grief, but also created a transformative cultural moment. Millions saw their own heartbreak reflected in her work, yet Beyoncé remained at the center, converting private pain into collective understanding. The complexity of reconciliation. Despite the betrayal, Beyoncé and Jay-Z worked toward reconciliation. This process was neither easy nor instantaneous. It required confronting the rawest elements of hurt, questioning the foundation of love, and renegotiating the trust that had been fractured. For Beyoncé, the reconciliation was bittersweet. It involved compromise, patience, and an acknowledgement of human fallibility. Yet, even as she chose to rebuild the marriage, the scars of betrayal remained. Trust, once broken, cannot be fully restored, and Beyoncé carried the weight of that truth in every interaction, every lyric, and every public appearance post-Lemonade. Motherhood and emotional resilience. During this period, Beyoncé's role as a mother intensified the emotional stakes. Raising Blue Ivy and later the twins while processing betrayal required extraordinary resilience. Each child became a source of grounding, yet also a reminder of the responsibility she bore. The heartbreak of infidelity was not isolated to her romantic life. It rippled into her identity as a mother. She faced the challenge of modeling emotional strength, resilience, and love for her children while privately grappling with grief. She had to compartmentalize to protect her family from the full force of personal trauma while maintaining the image of a powerful, unshakable icon. The public witness. What makes this heartbreak unique is its inescapable visibility. Unlike most people, Beyoncé could not grieve privately. Every album, every interview, every appearance was subjected to global scrutiny. Fans, critics, and media interpreted her pain, creating a constant feedback loop of pressure. Yet Beyoncé navigated this scrutiny with deliberate control. She chose what to reveal, how to reveal it, and when. By framing her narrative through art, she reclaimed authority over a story that could easily have been dominated by gossip and speculation. Legacy of the Betrayal. Ultimately, Jay-Z's infidelity and the resulting heartbreak became a transformative period in Beyoncé's life. It exposed vulnerabilities, forced introspection, and catalyzed a new depth of artistic expression. Artistic maturity. Lemonade showcased Beyoncé not just as a performer, but as a storyteller of human experience, capable of translating personal pain into universally resonant art. Emotional complexity. The heartbreak deepened her emotional range, allowing her to convey nuanced feelings of anger, grief, forgiveness, and empowerment in subsequent projects. Cultural influence. By sharing her story, Beyoncé created a blueprint for processing betrayal publicly yet powerfully, influencing countless others navigating similar personal crises. Even in the shadow of heartbreak, Beyoncé emerged resilient, stronger, and more self-aware. She demonstrated that personal tragedy, when confronted with courage and artistry, can become a tool for empowerment, dialogue, and legacy. Conclusion. Heartbreak transformed. Beyoncé's encounter with infidelity and betrayal is a study in human vulnerability at the intersection of fame, love, and artistry. The heartbreak was immense, private yet exposed, destructive yet catalytic. Through Lemonade, she transformed her pain into an enduring cultural artifact, a testament to resilience and self-reclamation. Her
Public scrutiny, media pressure, and the weight of iconic fame. Beyoncé's invisible burden. For Beyoncé, the pinnacle of fame has always been both a blessing and a profound curse. She inhabits a world where every move, every expression, and every decision is scrutinized by millions, a world in which privacy is virtually non-existent. The heartbreak she faced during her personal and marital struggles was compounded by the omnipresent public gaze, magnifying each emotional fracture into a spectacle for consumption. Beyoncé's experience of heartbreak cannot be separated from her experience of fame. Unlike most individuals who endure personal tragedies in relative privacy, her life is an open book, one where even the chapters she attempts to keep closed are pried open by the media. In this context, heartbreak becomes more than an emotional experience. It becomes a performance, a narrative shaped as much by public interpretation as by personal reality. The global audience of pain. The public's obsession with Beyoncé's life intensified during the period surrounding her personal betrayals and marital struggles. Social media, celebrity news outlets, and fan forums dissected every song, outfit, and cryptic lyric for hidden messages about her marriage and private pain. Beyoncé found herself trapped in a paradoxical situation. She was expected to maintain composure, elegance, and perfection while simultaneously being human, vulnerable, and expressive. The scrutiny meant that every display of emotion risked being misinterpreted as weakness, manipulation, or contrived performance. Her grief, private though it was, became public property. Viral speculation. Tabloids dissected her music for signs of infidelity, betrayal, and reconciliation. Headlines framed her heartbreak as entertainment, often reducing complex emotional realities to soundbites or gossip. Social media pressure. Millions of fans speculated on Instagram captions, Twitter posts, and public appearances, attempting to decode hidden meanings behind seemingly mundane statements or gestures. Celebrity culture expectations. As one of the most influential performers in the world, Beyoncé was expected to embody both perfection and relatability, a balance nearly impossible to maintain when personal life is in turmoil. The scrutiny meant that every display of emotion risked being misinterpreted as weakness, manipulation, or contrived performance. Her grief, private though it was, became public property. The inescapable media narrative. The media's role in amplifying Beyoncé's heartbreak cannot be overstated. Tabloids and online publications thrive on personal drama, particularly when it involves icons whose lives seem flawless. Every public appearance, every lyric, and every Instagram post became fodder for speculation. Narrative control. Beyoncé's challenge was to reclaim narrative authority. Through visual albums, strategic media appearances, and controlled interviews, she sought to tell her story on her own terms. Lemonade was a pivotal moment in this reclamation, transforming private anguish into public art with intentional storytelling. Misinterpretation and intrusion. Despite her careful narrative control, the media often distorted or oversimplified her experiences, framing them from maximum sensationalism rather than emotional truth. Headlines reduced the complexity of betrayal, grief, and reconciliation to a single consumable story. Constant surveillance. Paparazzi and social media intensified this pressure, documenting even the most private moments of her life, from family outings to subtle interactions with her husband, and broadcasting them to a global audience. This constant surveillance created a unique psychological burden. Beyoncé was forced to live in a state of heightened awareness, where private sorrow could become public spectacle at any moment. The heartbreak of infidelity became inseparable from the heartbreak of losing control over her own narrative. Fame as a double-edged sword. Beyoncé's iconic status magnifies both the joy and the pain in her life. Her fame affords immense opportunities, artistic freedom, global influence, financial security, but also imposes relentless pressure and emotional vulnerability. Amplified emotions. In a world where every expression is scrutinized, heartbreak is intensified. Ordinary sadness becomes headline news. Moments of vulnerability are replayed, analyzed, and critiqued globally. Emotional isolation. Despite her millions of fans and supportive team, Beyoncé experienced a profound sense of isolation. True intimacy, emotional connection without scrutiny became nearly impossible. The very fame that enables her influence also restricts her ability to fully grieve or process private pain. High-stakes performance. Every appearance, whether at award shows, on stage, or in interviews, required not only technical perfection, but also careful emotional management. She had to project strength and poise while navigating raw personal turmoil. This duality of fame is uniquely isolating. Beyoncé's heartbreak was both ordinary and extraordinary. Ordinary in its emotional depth, extraordinary in its visibility and global resonance. Art as shield and voice. In response to the suffocating weight of scrutiny, Beyoncé leaned heavily on her artistry. Music became both a shield and a voice, a way to process grief while controlling the narrative. Empowerment through creation. Albums like Lemonade and Beyoncé allowed her to channel pain into creative output. Music became a space where she could explore vulnerability safely, transforming private heartbreak into public empowerment. Visual storytelling. By pairing music with cinematic visuals, Beyoncé reclaimed narrative authority. The visual album format allowed her to present grief, betrayal, and resilience in a controlled environment, shaping interpretation while retaining emotional authenticity. Global dialogue. Through her art, Beyoncé initiated conversations about infidelity, grief, and resilience. She transformed personal pain into cultural discourse, influencing millions while navigating her own healing. Art became a paradoxical refuge, a way to publicly express private suffering without surrendering total control, and a means to reclaim power in a world that constantly tried to define her story. Family and emotional anchors. Despite global scrutiny, Beyoncé's family remained a vital source of grounding. Her children, Blue Ivy and the twins, were both inspiration and sanctuary. Protecting them from public intrusion became paramount, intensifying her resolve to navigate heartbreak with composure and strength. Her parents and close inner circle offered emotional support, yet even private relationships were tinged with the awareness of public attention. Every personal interaction was potentially visible, every family outing potentially documented, reinforcing the need for vigilance even in intimacy. The psychological toll. The intersection of personal heartbreak and public scrutiny produces unique psychological challenges. Chronic stress, constant surveillance, and judgment contribute to sustained stress affecting mental and emotional health. Emotional hypervigilance. The need to maintain composure and image fosters heightened alertness to social and emotional cues, complicating the natural process of grieving. Trust and privacy. The blurring of personal and public life makes establishing trust and privacy very difficult, impacting relationships and emotional processing. Beyoncé's ability to maintain her artistry, family life, and public image under these conditions is a testament to extraordinary resilience. Legacy of navigating scrutiny. Through this period, Beyoncé redefined the possibilities of navigating fame while enduring personal tragedy. She demonstrated that heartbreak can coexist with global influence, that emotional vulnerability can become a form of empowerment, and that personal narrative can be reclaimed even under relentless scrutiny. Cultural impact. By sharing her pain through art, she normalized conversations about betrayal, grief, and resilience in a way rarely seen at her level of fame. Artistic evolution. The pressure of public scrutiny catalyzed a deeper artistic maturity, resulting in music that blends personal truth with universal resonance. Empowerment model. Beyoncé exemplified a model of emotional agency, showing how one can navigate heartbreak and maintain dignity and control in a highly public life. Conclusion: heartbreak in the spotlight. Beyoncé's experience of heartbreak under public scrutiny reveals the invisible burdens of iconic fame. Her pain was personal, yet inseparable from her global identity. The heartbreak of Betrayal, compounded by relentless observation, created a crucible in which she transformed suffering into art, vulnerability into empowerment, and private anguish into cultural
The long shadow of sacrifice and personal cost. Beyoncé's life and career, celebrated worldwide for their brilliance, also carry an often unseen cost: the accumulation of sacrifices made in the pursuit of perfection, artistry, and global influence. Behind the spotlight, behind every sold-out arena and record-breaking album, exists a shadow, a long, complex legacy of personal sacrifice that touches every dimension of her life. Heartbreak, in Beyoncé's story, is not always dramatic or public. It is the subtle, persistent toll of choices made, time lost, and personal freedom surrendered to her career. This final point explores the profound, hidden weight of her extraordinary life, the long shadow that defines both her resilience and her human vulnerability. The sacrifice of time. One of the most tangible forms of heartbreak Beyoncé endures is the constant sacrifice of time. While the public sees her as ever-present, on stage, in videos, in media campaigns, her private hours are consumed by rehearsals, travel, and meticulous planning. Childhood dreams deferred. Beyoncé began performing at a young age, and the relentless focus on her craft meant childhood experiences were often secondary to practice and public performance. Playtime, carefree exploration, and the innocence of youth were frequently traded for studio sessions, auditions, and performances. Lost personal moments. Even in adulthood, moments of spontaneity, vacations without schedules, private dinners, unrecorded personal conversations are rare. Every hour of her day is structured around her career, leaving little room for ordinary experiences that many take for granted. Emotional time scarcity. The time she invests in family, friends, and self-care must compete with the unyielding demands of public life. Even vacations or family time can feel like an extension of work, layered with planning, travel logistics, and media scrutiny, creating a tension between presence and obligation. Time, a resource many consider limitless in youth or adulthood, is perhaps Beyoncé's most significant sacrifice, and with it, a quiet, ongoing form of heartbreak. The cost to personal relationships. The pursuit of excellence and the pressures of fame often collide with personal relationships, creating moments of tension, strain, and loss. For Beyoncé, maintaining intimacy and trust requires extraordinary effort in a world rife with public scrutiny. Marriage and public scrutiny. Her marriage to Jay-Z, while strong, has been subjected to intense media speculation and public commentary. Rumors, leaks, and celebrity gossip magnify private challenges, transforming ordinary marital issues into global headlines. The emotional labor required to protect, repair, and nurture a relationship under these conditions is immense. Friendships under strain. True friendships require time, vulnerability, and shared experience. For someone whose life is scheduled and scrutinized, sustaining long-term, authentic friendships becomes an intricate balancing act, often leaving little room for organic connection. Professional relationships and boundaries. Managing collaborations, contracts, and creative partnerships demands careful negotiation of boundaries. Every interaction carries stakes that could impact reputation, artistry, or financial outcomes, creating a professional environment where trust must be earned cautiously. The heartbreak here is subtle but persistent. The cost of personal connection and intimacy is high, and even minor conflicts or misunderstandings carry amplified emotional weight. The physical cost of longevity. Years of performing, choreographing, and touring have left physical marks on Beyoncé's body, a testament to both dedication and the unseen burden of endurance. Injury and recovery. Even minor injuries, strains, or exhaustion can become compounded by the unrelenting pace of her career. There is often no time for full recovery, meaning the body is pushed continually beyond its natural limits. Chronic fatigue. The combination of travel, late-night performances, and constant rehearsal leads to a form of chronic physical fatigue. Muscle soreness, vocal strain, and metabolic stress become ongoing companions in her life, invisible to the cheering crowds. Long-term health concerns. Over time, the wear and tear of performing at peak levels could contribute to long-term health consequences. Preventative care, therapy, and maintenance become necessities rather than choices, forming a continuous, silent narrative of sacrifice. Beyoncé's body, as much as her mind and heart, bears witness to the personal cost of excellence, a quiet but profound tragedy. Emotional sacrifice and identity. Beyoncé's artistry is rooted in emotional authenticity, yet maintaining this while navigating fame, family, and expectations requires ongoing emotional labor. Public persona versus private self. Beyoncé is a global icon, expected to embody perfection, empowerment, and poise at all times. Balancing this image with the realities of doubt, fatigue, and personal grief demands extraordinary self-discipline and emotional compartmentalization. Repression of vulnerability. Vulnerability, while central to her art, must be carefully managed in public life. Emotional transparency can be weaponized in the media, leaving her to internalize much of her personal heartbreak, creating a hidden emotional reservoir. Art as emotional outlet. Songs like Sandcastles or Resentment illustrate how she channels personal pain into creative expression. Yet this channeling is both cathartic and exhausting. Reliving heartbreak to produce art is a labor of emotional endurance. This duality, expressing emotion publicly while protecting the private self, casts a long shadow over personal freedom and emotional well-being. The burden of legacy. Even as Beyoncé's career is celebrated, the weight of legacy exerts constant pressure. Every decision, every project, contributes to a historical narrative she must maintain, often at the cost of personal desire. Cultural expectations. Beyoncé is expected to be a role model, a feminist icon, a mother, and a global ambassador for Black excellence. Meeting these expectations in every public and private action is a continuous emotional load. Artistic innovation. Fans, critics, and cultural historians expect her to reinvent herself continually, to produce art that resonates with contemporary issues while remaining timeless. This expectation leaves little room for creative pause or experimentation without consequence. Future-proofing legacy. Decisions are made not only for current impact, but for long-term influence. Career choices, public behavior, and artistic output are calculated to secure a lasting legacy, often prioritizing long-term significance over immediate personal gratification. The heartbreak of legacy is a paradox. The desire to create timeless, transformative art coexists with the personal cost of ensuring every step aligns with an enduring vision. Sacrifice of personal freedom. Beyoncé's life, while extraordinary, is constrained by the demands of fame, public expectation, and career commitments. Her choices, from daily routines to long-term goals, are frequently dictated by professional necessity. Loss of anonymity. Every outing, conversation, and gesture is subject to public observation. Simple pleasures, walking unnoticed, spontaneous adventures, private celebrations are often impossible. Restricted autonomy. Career decisions, while empowered, are never entirely free from expectation. Financial, artistic, and social obligations intertwine with public perception, creating limitations on personal autonomy. The heartbreak here is quiet but omnipresent, a life of extraordinary influence, yet one in which personal freedom is necessarily circumscribed. The unseen weight of perfection. Perfection, often celebrated in Beyoncé's art, is a heavy, continuous burden. Striving for flawlessness